In the remote Alaskan wilderness at Fort Richardson Advanced Training Facility, a 27-year-old former paramedic was about to face her most humiliating moment. What started as a routine marksmanship assessment took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a deliberately sabotaged rifle and a drill instructor's cruel expectations. Maya Leung wasn't your typical military recruit. For 3 years, she had spent her life saving lives as an emergency paramedic in Oakland, known for her steady hands and unshakable composure under pressure. When she encountered drill instructor Hardcase Blevins handing her a weapon with 17 mechanical defects, she had no idea she was walking into a test that would expose abilities she'd tried to bury. Maya's response: 5 perfect bullseyes through the exact center of targets 200 yards away, would lead to the attention of Section 9, a shadow program that officially didn't exist. What began as an instructor's attempt to break down an older, softer recruit would become the awakening of something extraordinary. The facility would never be the same after Maya Leung proved that some talents can't be taught, only awakened by trauma, and that precision isn't about perfect equipment, but perfect choices when everything else is falling away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The transport helicopter descended through the gray Alaskan sky like a metal bird carrying broken dreams. Maya Leung pressed her forehead against the small window, watching the remote military facility emerge from the wilderness below. At 27, she was older than the other recruits, chattering nervously around her, their voices mixing with the rhythmic thrum of rotor blades. She kept her hands folded in her lap, steady despite the turbulence that had the younger soldiers gripping their seats. The facility looked different from the recruitment brochures, more isolated, more permanent, more like a place where people disappeared rather than graduated. "First time flying?" asked the soldier beside her, a kid who couldn't be more than 19. His name tag read Walsh, and he had the eager, unbroken look of someone who still believed war was an adventure. Maya shook her head. No. She didn't mention the last helicopter ride, the one that had taken her away from Oakland General Hospital on the worst night of her life, the night Caden died while she was saving someone else's brother. The facility sprawled across a valley between 2 mountain ranges, its structures low and utilitarian. From above, it looked like a scar on the landscape, which seemed appropriate. Maya had come here carrying her own scars, hoping the military might teach her how to make sense of them. The landing was rough, the pilot fighting crosswinds that seemed determined to keep them airborne. When the helicopter finally touched down, Maya felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came with new beginnings. She had felt it when she'd started paramedic training, when she'd moved to Oakland, when she'd walked into Caden's school that final time. New beginnings had a way of leading to new endings. Drill instructor Harris Hardcase Blevins was waiting for them on the tarmac, his weathered face set in permanent disapproval. 25 years of military service had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth, and his posture screamed authority even when he was standing still. Maya had dealt with his type before, men who measured worth in decibels and push-ups. Leung, Maya, he read from his clipboard, former paramedic, Oakland General Hospital. He looked up at her with something approaching pity. "Let me guess, you watched too many movies about heroic soldiers and decided you wanted to save the world." "No, sir. I've already seen enough of the world to know it doesn't want saving." Something flickered in Blevins' eyes. Surprise, maybe even respect. But it was gone before anyone else could notice. He moved on to the next recruit, leaving Maya to wonder why she'd said something so revealing to a stranger. The barracks were exactly what she had expected: narrow beds, metal lockers, and the persistent smell of industrial disinfectant. Maya claimed a bunk in the corner, as far as the others as possible. She had learned long ago that staying on the periphery was safer than being in the center of attention.
As she unpacked her few belongings, she listened to the other recruits introduce themselves. Walsh was from Montana, the son of a rancher who'd never seen a city. Chen was from San Francisco, a computer programmer who decided he needed real-world experience. Martinez was from Texas, an ex-high school football star looking for his next team. They were all so young, so eager to prove themselves. Maya remembered being that age, remembered believing that the world made sense and that good people were rewarded while bad people were punished. Caden had been 19 when he died, 19 and brilliant and kind, shot by a classmate who decided that his pain was more important than everyone else's future. That first week at the facility was a blur of physical training, equipment familiarization, and psychological evaluations. Maya excelled at the written assessments, her paramedic training giving her advantages in anatomy, trauma response, and crisis decision-making. She performed adequately in the physical challenges, her years of lifting patients and working 12-hour shifts having built a quiet strength that surprised some of the younger recruits. But it was the reaction drills that caught Sergeant Elio Grant's attention. Hidden cameras recorded every trainee during simulated emergency scenarios, and Maya's responses were unlike anything Grant had seen in 15 years of military service. She didn't panic under pressure. Instead, she seemed to become calmer, more focused. Her situational awareness was exceptional, her decision-making precise and immediate. Grant pulled her file after the third day, studying the redacted sections with growing interest. There were gaps in her employment history, medical records that had been sealed, and incident reports that referenced extraordinary circumstances without providing details. Whatever had happened in Oakland, it had been significant enough to warrant classification. The dream started on the fourth night. Maya found herself back in Caden's high school, running through empty hallways that stretched on forever. She could hear gunshots in the distance, echoing off lockers and classroom doors. In the dream, she was always too late, always arriving just as the last shot faded into silence. She woke with her heart pounding and her sheets soaked with sweat. The barracks were quiet, except for the soft breathing of sleeping recruits. Maya lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and trying to push down the familiar guilt that threatened to consume her. "You okay?" The whisper came from the bunk next to hers. Maya turned to see Private Serena Wells watching her with sharp, knowing eyes. Wells was street-smart and sarcastic, with a criminal record that had been expunged in exchange for military service. "Bad dreams," Maya whispered back. "Yeah, I get those too," Wells said. "The past has a way of following you, doesn't it?" Maya nodded, surprised to find someone who understood. Most people assumed that trauma was something you could leave behind, like a bad neighborhood or a toxic job. But trauma was more like a scar. It might fade with time, but it never completely disappeared. By the end of the first week, Maya had settled into an uneasy routine. She kept to herself, performed well in training, and tried to ignore the way Blevins watched her with growing suspicion. He could tell I was waiting for her to crack, to reveal some weakness he could exploit. What he didn't understand was that she'd already been broken once. What remained was stronger than what had come before. The other recruits had started to accept her presence, though she remained somewhat of an enigma to them. She helped with their studies when asked, shared her rations when someone forgot to eat, and never complained during the hardest training sessions. She was reliable in a way that inspired confidence without demanding attention. But Grant was beginning to see something else in Maya Leung, something that made him pull her psychological profile again, this time with growing certainty that the quiet woman with the steady hands and haunted eyes was exactly what Section 9 had been looking for. The morning of the marksmanship assessment dawned gray and cold, with a bitter wind cutting across the range like a blade. Maya stood with the other recruits, watching their breath mist in the frigid air as Drill Instructor Blevins explained the rules of engagement. "Today we separate the shooters from the prayers," Blevins announced, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind. 200 yards, standard targets, 10 rounds each. Anyone who can't group within the black should consider a career in food service. Maya had been dreading this moment since arriving at the facility. Her file listed no formal firearms training, no hunting experience, no competitive shooting background. On paper, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a former paramedic who'd never held a rifle before joining the military. The truth was far more complicated. She watched as the first group of recruits took their positions at the firing line. Walsh managed a respectable grouping, his ranching background serving him well. Chen struggled with the recoil, his shot scattered across the target face. Martinez hit consistently but low, his football player's build working against the rifle's geometry. Next group, Blevins called, and Maya found herself walking towards the firing line with 5 other recruits. She could feel Grant's eyes on her from the observation area, where he stood with a clipboard and a pair of expensive binoculars. Blevins moved down the line, handing out rifles to each shooter. When he reached Maya, he paused, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Our quiet little medic gets to play with the big kids today." He held up a rifle that looked wrong even from a distance. "This one's been giving us trouble, Leung. Figured I'd let you give it a try."
Maya took the weapon, immediately sensing the problems that Blevins had deliberately ignored. The stock felt loose, the barrel showed signs of warping, and the scope was obviously misaligned. Even the ammunition he'd provided felt light in her palm, underpowered rounds that would never reach the target with sufficient velocity. It was a setup, pure and simple. Blevins expected her to fail publicly, to prove his point about soft civilians who didn't belong in uniform. Maya could have called him out, could have demanded a different rifle, could have reported the sabotage to Grant. Instead, she simply nodded and took her position at the firing line. The other recruits completed their firing strings with varying degrees of success. Maya listened to each shot, unconsciously cataloging the sound signatures and estimating accuracy based on the reports. When the line went cold and targets were checked, she wasn't surprised to see the predictable results. Some hits, some misses, nothing exceptional. "Final shooter," Blevins announced. "Leung, you're up." Maya raised the sabotaged rifle to her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight distribution that confirmed all her suspicions. The stock had been shortened, throwing off the balance. The scope was loose enough to make precision impossible. Even the trigger had been adjusted to create an unpredictable break. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting muscle memory take over. Suddenly she was 19 again, crouched behind an overturned cafeteria table while chaos erupted around her. She could smell gun smoke and fear, could hear Caden calling her name from somewhere in the darkness. When she opened her eyes, the world had narrowed to a single point of focus. The broken rifle no longer mattered. In her hands, it became an extension of her will, its defects compensated by micro-adjustments that seemed to flow from pure instinct. She could feel the wind speed and direction, could account for the ammunition's reduced velocity, could adjust for every sabotage component without conscious thought. The shot cracked across the range like thunder. 200 yards away, the bullet punched through the exact center of the bullseye. The silence that followed lasted 3 heartbeats. Then someone whispered a curse under their breath, and the spell was broken. Blevins lowered his binoculars, his face draining of color. Around her, the other recruits stared in stunned disbelief. Maya calmly worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. The familiar motion felt like breathing, necessary and automatic. "Would you like me to try again, instructor?" she asked quietly. Blevins nodded numbly, his earlier cockiness evaporating like morning mist. This time, Maya didn't even pause to aim. The second shot followed the first through the same hole, the target center completely obliterated. The third shot, the fourth, the fifth. Each one found its mark with mechanical precision, turning the bullseye into a ragged crater of shredded paper and cardboard. By the time Maya set the rifle down, word had already begun to spread throughout the facility. Within hours, her name would reach the ears of people who specialized in finding individuals with very particular skills. People who understood that some talents couldn't be taught, only awakened. But Maya didn't know that yet. She simply stood at attention, waiting for her next order, unaware that her life had just changed forever. The walk back to the barracks was surreal. The other recruits looked at her differently now. Where once there had been dismissive glances, now there was something approaching awe, mixed with unease. Maya had just done something that shouldn't have been possible, and everyone on that firing range knew it. Blevins himself seemed shaken, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. He had expected humiliation and instead witnessed something that defied explanation. The broken rifle lay on the bench beside him, smoking slightly from the rapid fire, a testament to the impossibility of what had just occurred. That evening, the mess hall buzzed with nervous energy, but Maya ate her dinner in relative peace. Word traveled fast in military circles, and by now, everyone had heard about the impossible shots with the broken rifle. Some recruits whispered theories: family of hunters, secret competition background, beginner's luck stretched to impossible limits. None of them came close to the truth. Maya had learned long ago to deflect attention rather than invite it. When approached, she offered modest explanations about growing up around firearms, hunting with her grandfather, nothing that would raise serious questions. The real story, the one about muscle memory that ran deeper than conscious thought, about skills that seemed to exist in her bones, that story stayed locked away. After dinner, she found herself standing outside the barracks, staring up at the star-filled Alaskan sky. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she welcomed the discomfort. It was better than the suffocating weight of everyone's expectations. Impressive shooting today.
Maya turned to find Sergeant Grant approaching, his footsteps quiet on the frozen ground. Unlike Blevins, Grant moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years in active combat zones. "Thank you, Sergeant," Maya replied carefully. Grant stopped beside her, following her gaze up to the stars. "You know, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen natural shooters, trained marksmen, even a few genuine prodigies. But what you did today?" He shook his head. "That wasn't talent. That was something else entirely." Maya remained silent, unsure how to respond. "The rifle Blevins gave you was a piece of junk, deliberately sabotaged. You knew that, didn't you?" "Yes, Sergeant." "And you shot anyway?" "Yes, Sergeant." Grant nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "Get some sleep, Leung. Tomorrow's going to be an interesting day." As he walked away, Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan wind. Whatever she'd awakened on that firing range, it was bigger than marksmanship scores or training assessments. It was the kind of thing that attracted attention from people who operated in the shadows, who saw human beings as assets to be deployed rather than lives to be protected. She thought of Caden, of his gentle smile and artistic hands, of his belief that every person deserved to be saved. What would he think of his sister now, standing in the wilderness with blood on her hands and death in her eyes? The stars offered no answers, only the cold comfort of infinite distance. Maya's summons came at 0500 hours, delivered by a stone-faced MP who offered no explanation beyond, "Colonel Idris wants to see you. Now." She followed him across the facility in the pre-dawn darkness, past buildings she'd never been inside and guards she'd never seen before. The administrative complex was larger than it appeared from the outside, with corridors that seemed to stretch deep into the mountain itself. Security checkpoints became more frequent as they walked, each requiring different access cards and biometric scans. They stopped outside a door marked only with a number, 247. The MP knocked twice, waited for a response, then gestured Maya inside. The office was spartanly furnished but clearly expensive, all clean lines and high-tech equipment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the training facility below, where early morning PT was already underway. Behind an impressive desk sat a woman in her 40s, her dark skin contrasting sharply with the silver eagles on her uniform collar. Colonel Sanaa Idris was smaller than Maya had expected, but her presence filled the room like a barely contained explosion. Her eyes were intelligent and calculating, the kind that saw through pretense and cataloged weaknesses for future use. "Sit," Idris said, gesturing to a chair positioned precisely in front of her desk. "Coffee?"
No thank you, ma'am. Idris poured herself a cup from an expensive-looking machine, taking her time with the ritual. Maya got the impression this was a woman who did nothing without purpose, including the seemingly casual delay. "Tell me about yesterday's marksmanship test," Idris said finally. Maya kept her expression neutral. "I qualified on the rifle range, ma'am." "You did more than qualify." Idris touched something on her desk, and the office lights dimmed. A wall screen flickered to life, showing high-resolution footage of Maya's shooting performance. "This is security camera footage from multiple angles. We have thermal imaging, audio analysis, even biometric monitoring from sensors built into the firing line." The video played in slow motion, showing Maya's impossible shots from perspectives that revealed just how damaged the rifle had been. Graphics overlaid the footage, highlighting the scope misalignment, the barrel warp, the shortened stock. Mathematical calculations filled the margins, showing the precise adjustments needed to compensate for each defect. The rifle you were given had 17 separate mechanical problems. Any one of them should have made accurate shooting impossible. All 17 together should have rendered the weapon completely inaccurate beyond 50 meters. Maya watched herself on screen, seeing for the first time how she'd moved. The subtle stance adjustments, the unconscious compensation for the rifle's defects, the eerie stillness that had preceded each shot. Yet you not only hit the target, you achieved a grouping that would be impressive with a properly functioning weapon. With a sabotaged rifle, it's statistically impossible. The video ended, and the lights returned to normal. Idris studied Maya's face for a long moment, as if reading a complex equation written in her expression. "Colonel Grant has been reviewing your file. The complete file, not the sanitized version they give to drill instructors. Would you like to know what we found?" Maya's throat grew dry, but she kept her voice steady. "I assume you're going to tell me regardless of my answer, ma'am."
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Oakland General Hospital. 3 years ago, you were working a night shift when armed gunmen entered the emergency department. They took 17 hostages, including you and your patients. Police response was delayed due to a coordinated attack on multiple city targets. Idris pulled up another file on her screen, though she didn't turn it toward Maya. The official report states that you acted heroically to protect patients and staff. It doesn't mention the security footage that shows you systematically eliminating 3 armed hostiles with what the police described as extraordinary precision. Maya felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. She'd hoped that part of her life would stay buried forever. 2 headshots at extreme close range with a borrowed service pistol, Idris continued. A 3rd shot that severed a man's spinal cord without killing him, effectively neutralizing the threat while keeping him alive for interrogation. The responding officers called it the most precise defensive shooting they'd ever witnessed. "I was lucky," Maya said quietly. "Luck?" Idris laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You fired 3 shots in under 2 seconds in a crowded emergency room while being used as a human shield. That's not luck, Ms. Leung. That's capability." The colonel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that surrounded the facility. "Your brother was killed 6 months later. Caden Leung, 19, art student at UC Berkeley, shot by a classmate who'd obtained an illegal firearm." Maya's hands clenched involuntarily. "That's not relevant to my military service." "Isn't it?" Idris turned back to face her. "You enlisted 3 weeks after his funeral. A former paramedic with an exemplary record, suddenly abandoning her career to join the military at 27. That suggests motivation beyond patriotic duty." "I wanted to serve my country." "You wanted to understand what happened to you in that hospital. You wanted to know why you could do things that shouldn't be possible, and now you want to know how to control it." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths.
Finally, Idris returned to her desk and pulled out a thin folder marked with classification levels Maya didn't recognize. Section 9, she said. It's a program that doesn't officially exist, designed to identify and develop individuals with capabilities that fall outside normal parameters. We recruit people like you, those who demonstrate skills that can't be explained by conventional training or natural talent. She opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents that Maya couldn't read from her position. We're not interested in making super soldiers or creating human weapons. We're interested in understanding the intersection between trauma, instinct, and extraordinary performance. What makes you think I'm interested? Maya asked. Because you're here. Because you enlisted after your brother's death. Because you took that sabotaged rifle and shot perfectly anyway. You're not running from what you are. You're trying to understand it. Maya considered this, thinking of the dreams that haunted her sleep and the way her hands never shook when violence threatened. What would be required? Additional training, specialized missions, complete psychological evaluation and support, the opportunity to work with others who share your unique capabilities. Others? Idris smiled for the first time since Maya had entered the room. You're not the only one, Ms. Leung. There are others who've discovered they possess abilities that conventional military training can't explain. Section 9 brings them together. Maya thought of Caden, of his gentle hands and artistic soul, of his belief that every person deserved protection. What would he think of his sister joining a program designed to weaponize trauma? I need time to consider. Of course, but understand, this opportunity won't be extended indefinitely. Section 9 is selective by necessity. We can't afford to wait for people to overcome their reluctance. Maya stood to leave, but Idris stopped her with one final comment. Your brother, the colonel said quietly. The night he was killed, you weren't there. You've been carrying that guilt ever since, wondering if you could have saved him the same way you saved those people in the hospital. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Section 9 can't bring him back, Idris continued, but it can help you ensure that other people's brothers and sisters come home alive. Think about that when you make your decision. The walk back to the barracks felt endless. Maya's mind raced with possibilities and implications, trying to process everything she'd learned. Section 9 wasn't just a military program. It was an acknowledgement that people like her existed, that her capabilities weren't freakish aberrations but valuable assets. But at what cost? And, more importantly, what would Caden think of his sister becoming exactly the kind of person they both had feared? As she reached the barracks, Maya found Sergeant Grant waiting for her outside. Rough conversation?
Is this where you tell me about your own recruitment? Maya replied. Grant smiled grimly. Something like that. Colonel Idris asked me to serve as your liaison, if you decide to accept. I'd been where you are now, gifted, confused, and carrying more guilt than any one person should have to bear. And? Section 9 gave me purpose, a way to use what I am, instead of being ashamed of it. He paused. But it also cost me things I can never get back. The choice is yours, but it's not one you should make lightly. That night, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling while her fellow recruits slept peacefully around her. Tomorrow she would have to decide whether to embrace her nature or continue fighting against it. In her dreams, Caden was waiting for her in their childhood home, paint-stained fingers gesturing as he explained a canvas covered in swirling colors. It's not about the brush, it's about knowing when to paint and when to leave the canvas blank. When she woke, Maya finally understood what her choice would be. The helicopter that carried Maya away from Fort Richardson flew deeper into the Alaskan wilderness than any map would show. 2 hours of mountains and tundra passed beneath them before she saw their destination, a cluster of innocuous buildings nestled in a valley that looked like it had been carved specifically to hide secrets.
The forge appeared smaller from above than it actually was. Most of the facility had been built into the mountain itself, a honeycomb of training areas, laboratories, and living quarters that extended deep underground. Solar panels and wind turbines provided power, but Maya suspected there were backup systems that could keep the place running independently for months. Sergeant Grant met her at the landing pad, his expression unreadable in the Arctic wind. "Welcome to your new home," he said, shouldering her gear bag. "Fair warning, this isn't like anything you experienced at Richardson." The entrance was disguised as a maintenance building, but beyond the steel door lay corridors lined with blast-resistant materials and biometric scanners. Her hand was scanned, her retina photographed, her voice recorded for future identification. By the time they reached the main facility, she felt like she'd been cataloged and filed away. Section 9 maintains 12 facilities worldwide. The Forge specializes in what we call adaptive capability development. We take people with natural gifts and teach them how to use those gifts strategically. They passed a gym where someone was bench pressing what looked like 400 pounds with casual ease. Through another window, Maya glimpsed a woman disassembling and reassembling a rifle blindfolded, her movements so fast they blurred. In the third room, a man sat perfectly still while computers monitored his brain activity, somehow maintaining a meditative state despite the chaos of flashing lights and jarring sounds around him. "How many people are here?" Maya asked. 43 active trainees, plus support staff. We keep the numbers small for operational security and to maintain individual attention. Grant stopped outside a door marked with Maya's name. "Your quarters. Dinner's at 1800. Try to get some rest. Training starts at 0500 tomorrow." Maya's quarters were spartanly furnished but comfortable, with a single bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out into the valley. She unpacked her few belongings, trying to process the reality of her situation. 3 days ago, she'd been a recruit among dozens. Now she was part of something that officially didn't exist, surrounded by people whose abilities defied explanation. Dinner was served in a common area that felt more like a college cafeteria than a military facility. The conversations she overheard were surreal. Casual discussions of infiltration techniques, debates about the ethics of targeted eliminations, technical analyses of weapon systems she'd never heard of. "You must be the new sniper," said a voice behind her. Maya turned to find a young woman with short black hair and intelligent eyes. "I'm Serena Wells. Heard you made quite an impression at Richardson." "I didn't think anyone else from our group made it here." "Most didn't," Wells replied, sitting across from Maya with her dinner tray. "I got picked up after I hacked into the base commander's personal files to prove he was selling equipment on the black market. Apparently, they like people who can think outside regulations." "What's your specialty?" Wells grinned. "Digital infiltration, social engineering, and what they politely call unconventional problem solving. I can get into any system, convince anyone to trust me, and make people disappear without violence. What about you, besides the obvious marksmanship thing?" Maya considered the question. "I'm still figuring that out." The first week at the Forge was unlike anything Maya had experienced. The training was intense, but cerebral, focusing on decision-making under extreme stress rather than simple physical conditioning. She found herself in scenarios that challenged every assumption she had ever made about combat and ethics. In one exercise, she was given a weapon she'd never seen before, some kind of electromagnetic pulse rifle, and told to neutralize targets in a mock urban environment. Despite never having trained with the weapon, she adapted to its unique characteristics within minutes, her shots finding their marks with the same impossible precision she demonstrated at Richardson. "It's not just marksmanship," Grant observed during her debrief. "You have an intuitive understanding of ballistics, trajectory, and weapon systems that goes beyond training. It's like your brain processes spatial relationships and physics calculations at an unconscious level."
"Is that why I'm here?" "It's part of it," Grant replied carefully.
But Section 9 is interested in more than just your shooting ability. We're interested in your judgment, your capacity for moral reasoning under pressure, and your ability to adapt to impossible situations. Maya's relationship with Wells deepened through shared hardship. The other woman had her own demons, a childhood spent in foster care, a history of using her intelligence to survive in environments where weakness meant victimization. But she also had an irreverent sense of humor and a loyalty that Maya found both surprising and comforting. "The thing about this place," Wells said one evening as they sat in Maya's room sharing a bottle of bourbon that had somehow appeared in her locker, "is that everyone here is broken in some way. The trick is figuring out if we're broken in compatible ways." "What do you mean?" "Take Johnson down the hall. He can run a marathon in under 2 hours and bench press a small car, but he hasn't slept more than 2 consecutive hours since his unit got ambushed in Syria. Or Martinez from logistics. She can organize a supply chain that would make Amazon jealous, but she does it because planning every detail is the only way she can feel in control after watching her family die in a hurricane." Wells took a sip of bourbon and stared out the window at the stars. "We're all here because we're good at something that requires us to be damaged first. The question is whether we can use that damage constructively or let it destroy us." Maya thought about Caden, about the guilt that drove her to excel and the grief that sharpened her focus. "What's your damage?" "Trust issues," Wells replied with a bitter laugh. "Turns out being abandoned by everyone who is supposed to protect you as a kid makes you really good at reading people and figuring out their weaknesses. Section 9 loves that skill set." The training intensified as weeks passed. Maya found herself working with equipment she'd only seen in science fiction films, facing scenarios that pushed her decision-making abilities to their limits. But it was the psychological component that proved most challenging. Dr. Jules Minamoto, the facility's staff psychiatrist, conducted regular sessions that felt more like interrogations. He was a small, precise man who seemed to see through every defense Maya had constructed. "Your capabilities are impressive," he said during one session, "but I'm concerned about the source. Your brother's death created a trauma response that manifests as hypervigilance and exceptional spatial awareness. The question is whether you're healing from that trauma or being further damaged by it." "Does it matter as long as I'm effective?" "It matters because effectiveness without psychological stability is just delayed breakdown," Minamoto replied. "Section 9 has seen operatives who burned out spectacularly when their coping mechanisms failed. We're not interested in creating weapons that self-destruct." 3 months into her training, Maya was selected for her first solo field exercise. The briefing took place in a sterile conference room that smelled of coffee and anxiety. Colonel Idris stood before a large screen showing satellite imagery of an urban area. "This is a simulated city we've constructed in the Nevada desert. Every building is real, every street is functional, and every person inside is a paid actor following detailed scripts." The city looked authentic from the aerial view. Traffic patterns, pedestrian movement, even construction sites and food vendors. Maya had heard rumors about Section 9's training facilities, but seeing the scope of their resources was intimidating. "Your target is Viktor Kozlov," Idris continued, pulling up a photograph of a middle-aged man with Slavic features. "Former Russian intelligence operative turned arms dealer. He's arranged to sell portable surface-to-air missiles to terrorist cells. Our intelligence suggests he'll be making final arrangements at a cafe in the city center tomorrow afternoon." Grant stood beside the screen, his expression serious. "This is a kill mission. Clean, surgical, minimal collateral damage. You'll have one opportunity to take the shot before security protocols force us to abort." Maya studied the target photograph and the tactical briefing materials. Everything looked legitimate, from Kozlov's criminal background to the intelligence reports about the missile sale. She would be inserted 12 hours before the scheduled meeting, giving her time to establish position and confirm the target. "What about civilian casualties?" she asked. The actors have been briefed to clear the area when the exercise begins, but remember, this is meant to simulate reality as closely as possible. You won't know who's a civilian and who's part of the target security detail. At exactly 1400 hours, Viktor Kozlov appeared at the cafe, taking a table near the window. He was accompanied by 2 bodyguards, who positioned themselves strategically around the seating area. Maya adjusted her scope and began calculating range, wind speed, and trajectory. Through her optics, she could see Kozlov checking his watch repeatedly, obviously waiting for someone. A briefcase sat on the table beside him, presumably containing either payment or documents related to the missile transaction. Maya's finger found the trigger, applying the first stage of pressure. At this range, the shot would be routine. Kozlov was sitting perfectly still, presenting an ideal target profile. All she had to do was complete the trigger pull, and the exercise would be over. Then, a small figure appeared at the edge of her scope's field of view. A child, a girl who couldn't be more than 7 years old, ran toward Kozlov's table. The man's face lit up with genuine joy as he stood to embrace her. Through her scope, she could see the family resemblance. This was Kozlov's daughter, unmentioned in any of the briefing materials. The little girl climbed onto Kozlov's lap, chattering excitedly while pointing at something in the street. He smiled and held her close, his hand stroking her dark hair with obvious affection. Maya's breathing steadied automatically, her body preparing to take the shot. But her finger refused to move. She watched through the scope as Kozlov ordered ice cream for his daughter, as he helped her color in a book she'd brought, as he answered her questions with patient attention. The moment stretched endlessly. Mission parameters dictated that she take the shot immediately. Every second of delay increased the risk of detection and compromise. But Maya couldn't reconcile the image of a loving father with the arms dealer described in her briefing materials. Control, this is Overwatch. You have a clear shot. Confirm target acquisition. Target acquired, Maya replied, her crosshairs centered on Kozlov's chest. But there's a civilian in close proximity. Negative, Overwatch. All civilians have been cleared from the exercise area. You are authorized to engage. Maya knew she should trust the briefing, should accept that the child was just another actor playing a role. But something in the girl's laughter, in Kozlov's gentle manner with her, made the scenario feel devastatingly real. Taking the shot, Maya announced, buying herself time to think. She could do it. She had the skill, the opportunity, the authorization. One squeeze of the trigger, and the exercise would be over. Viktor Kozlov would die, the missile sale would be prevented, and Maya would have completed her first assassination successfully. Then, she took her finger off the trigger and set the rifle down. Control, this is Overwatch. I'm aborting the mission. Silence filled her earpiece for several seconds before Idris's voice crackled through. Explain your decision, Overwatch. Target is with a civilian minor, unacceptable risk of collateral damage. The exercise is over, Grant's voice interrupted. All actors, stand down. Overwatch, return to base for debrief. The debrief was conducted in a sterile conference room that felt more like a courtroom than a military facility. Maya sat across from Colonel Idris, Grant, and Dr. Minamoto, their faces revealing nothing about their assessment of her performance. You failed the primary objective, Idris began without preamble. Viktor Kozlov remained alive. The missile sale presumably proceeded, and our intelligence operation was compromised. The target was with his daughter.
Maya replied evenly. The briefing materials made no mention of family members being present. Because family members weren't supposed to be present, the little girl was a last-minute addition to the scenario, designed to test your ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Idris leaned forward in her chair. In the field, targets don't conveniently isolate themselves for clean elimination. They have families, bodyguards, innocent bystanders who complicate mission parameters. Your job is to complete the objective despite those complications. My job is to make tactical decisions based on available information. Killing a man in front of his child serves no strategic purpose and creates unnecessary psychological trauma for a civilian. The child was an actor, Minamoto observed quietly. She was performing a role, not experiencing actual trauma. But I didn't know that, Maya replied. From my perspective, I was being asked to murder someone in front of their daughter. That's a line I won't cross. Silence filled the room for several minutes while the three officers exchanged glances. Finally, Idris spoke again. Your refusal to take the shot demonstrates both strength and weakness. Strength because you maintained your moral compass under pressure. Weakness because you prioritized personal ethics over mission success. What happens now? Now you get a chance to apply those ethics in a real-world scenario. We have an actual mission that requires someone with your particular skill set and moral flexibility. The briefing took place 2 days later. This time, the target was Ahmed Hassan, a bomb maker operating out of Marrakesh who had been supplying explosives to insurgent cells across North Africa. Unlike the simulated exercise, this mission came with real intelligence, real stakes, and real consequences.
Hassan has been directly responsible for at least 30 civilian deaths in the past 6 months, Idris explained, showing surveillance photographs of the man. He's scheduled to meet with a contact tomorrow afternoon to finalize delivery of materials for an attack on a marketplace in Casablanca. Maya studied the intelligence packet, noting the methodical documentation of Hassan's activities. Unlike Kozlov, this target had no redeeming characteristics, no sympathetic family members to complicate the moral equation. What's the mission parameter? Neutralize Hassan before he can complete the transaction, Grant replied. Preferably with extreme prejudice, but we're giving you discretionary authority on methodology. The phrase discretionary authority was significant. Maya understood that she was being tested again, given the freedom to define her own moral boundaries within the mission framework. The insertion into Morocco went smoothly. Maya found herself in Marrakesh's old quarter, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a city that had existed for centuries. The narrow streets and traditional architecture provided excellent concealment opportunities, but also limited escape routes if the mission went wrong. She established overwatch in a rented room overlooking the cafe where Hassan was supposed to meet his contact. The building was 4 stories tall, constructed of red clay that would provide adequate sound dampening for a rifle shot. Hassan arrived exactly on schedule, taking a table near the back of the cafe where he could observe the entrance. He was a thin, nervous man in his 40s, constantly checking his surroundings with the paranoia of someone who knew he had enemies. Maya watched him through her scope, noting his behavioral patterns. Every few minutes, Hassan would tap out a complex rhythm on the table with his fingers, some kind of coded signal that she didn't recognize. When a server approached, he would cover a small notebook with his hand, obviously protecting sensitive information. The contact arrived 20 minutes later, a woman in traditional dress who sat at Hassan's table without greeting or acknowledgement. They spoke in hushed tones while the woman examined something Hassan had brought in a briefcase. Through her rifle scope, Maya could see enough of the case's contents to confirm the intelligence reports. plastic explosives, electronic timing devices, and what looked like ball bearings for shrapnel effects. This was definitely the transaction they'd been sent to prevent. She had a clear shot. Hassan was sitting perfectly still, focused on his conversation with the contact. A single bullet would end his bomb-making career permanently and prevent the planned marketplace attack. But as Maya watched, she noticed something the intelligence reports had missed. Hassan's finger-tapping wasn't random paranoia. It was Morse code. He was transmitting information about other meetings, other contacts, other planned attacks. If she killed him now, that intelligence would die with him. Maya made a decision that wasn't covered in any tactical manual. Instead of aiming for Hassan's center mass, she adjusted her scope to target his right shoulder. The shot would incapacitate him without causing fatal injury, allowing for capture and interrogation while still preventing the immediate transaction. The rifle cracked once, and Hassan spun out of his chair with a scream of pain and surprise. His contact fled immediately, abandoning both the money and the explosives. Within minutes, Maya could hear sirens approaching as local security forces responded to reports of gunfire. She had 15 minutes to extract Hassan herself before the authorities arrived. The next few minutes were a blur of improvised tactics and split-second decisions. Maya rappelled from her sniper position, fought her way through panicked cafe patrons, and managed to secure the wounded bomb maker before anyone else realized what had happened. Hassan was conscious but in severe pain, his shoulder shattered by the high-velocity round. As Maya applied pressure bandages to control the bleeding, she interrogated Hassan about his network's planned operations. The information he provided saved hundreds of lives. Hassan's organization had been planning coordinated attacks across 3 countries, operations that were prevented because Maya chose to wound rather than kill. When Moroccan intelligence took custody of the prisoner, they recovered enough intelligence to dismantle the entire network. The after-action review should have been a celebration. Maya's mission in Marrakesh was being hailed as a perfect example of adaptive tactics and moral reasoning. Hassan's intelligence had led to the prevention of multiple terrorist attacks and the capture of dozens of operatives across North Africa. Instead, the briefing room felt tense with unspoken conflicts. "Unorthodox doesn't begin to describe your methodology," Colonel Idris said, reviewing Maya's mission report. "You were authorized to eliminate the target, not capture him." "The capture yielded better results than elimination would have," Maya replied. "We prevented not just one attack, but an entire campaign." "That's not the point," interjected Major Harrison, an officer Maya hadn't met before. He was tall, sharp-featured, and radiated the kind of military precision that left no room for improvisation. Grant leaned forward in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "The results speak for themselves. Maya prevented multiple civilian casualties and gathered actionable intelligence that's still yielding arrests."
"Results achieved through luck, not planning," Harrison countered. "What if the target had been better protected? What if local security had responded faster? What if the wound had been fatal despite her intentions? We'd be dealing with a blown operation and a compromised asset." Maya realized she was witnessing an ideological battle that had been brewing long before her arrival. Harrison represented the traditional approach: clean eliminations, minimal complications, predictable outcomes. Grant and Idris seemed more willing to accept complexity in exchange for better results. "There's also the psychological component to consider," Dr. Minamoto added quietly. "Maya's refusal to kill unnecessarily demonstrates healthy moral boundaries. Eliminating those boundaries often leads to operational breakdown." Harrison's expression hardened. "This isn't therapy, Doctor. This is warfare. Operatives who can't follow orders become liabilities." After the meeting, Grant pulled Maya aside for a private conversation. They walked through the forge's underground corridors, past training areas where other operatives honed skills that officially didn't exist. Grant saw Maya's difficulty with high lethal missions as both a weakness and an opportunity for her testing. "Harrison isn't wrong about the risks," he said finally. "Your approach in Marrakesh could have gone badly in a dozen different ways." "But it didn't?" "This time,"
Grant replied. "But there are people in Section 9 who believe your methods are too unpredictable to be reliable. They think you're a liability waiting to happen." Maya felt a familiar chill of isolation. "What do you think?" "I think you're exactly what Section 9 needs," Grant said. "But I also think you're in danger from your own colleagues." The danger manifested sooner than either of them expected. 3 weeks later, Maya was assigned to lead a training exercise for newer recruits. The scenario involved breaching a fortified position while minimizing civilian casualties, exactly the kind of complex tactical problem that played to her strengths. Serena Wells was part of her team, along with 2 other operatives Maya trusted. The exercise was supposed to be routine, an opportunity for Maya to demonstrate leadership while the recruits learned advanced techniques. The intelligence briefing was flawless, the equipment was state-of-the-art, and the tactical plan was elegant in its simplicity. Maya's team would infiltrate the building through multiple entry points, while she provided overwatch from an adjacent structure. Once inside, they would neutralize hostile targets while protecting civilian actors scattered throughout the facility. Everything went wrong in the first 30 seconds. The building's layout had been changed without Maya's knowledge. Walls had been moved, doorways sealed, and new obstacles added that weren't reflected in the intelligence briefing she had received. When Wells attempted to breach what should have been a clear corridor, she walked directly into a trap that hadn't existed during reconnaissance. The explosion was contained but devastating. Wells was thrown backward by the blast, her body armor absorbing most of the impact but not all of it. When the smoke cleared, she was unconscious with obvious signs of internal injury. Maya abandoned her overwatch position immediately, fighting her way through the compromised building to reach her friend. She found Wells being treated by medics, her face pale but her eyes open and alert. "Somebody screwed with the floor plan," Wells whispered as Maya knelt beside her stretcher. "This wasn't an accident." The investigation that followed was thorough but inconclusive. Someone had indeed modified the training scenario after Maya's team had completed their reconnaissance, but identifying the responsible party proved impossible. Too many people had access to the training facility, too many potential motives existed, and the electronic logs had been expertly altered to hide the evidence. But Maya knew who was responsible. She could see it in Harrison's satisfied expression during the incident review, could feel it in the way certain officers avoided making eye contact when the investigation was discussed. Someone had decided that Maya needed to be taught a lesson about the consequences of nonconformity. "This is what happens when you make enemies of your own people," Wells said during her recovery. She was confined to bed rest for 2 weeks, her injuries severe enough to require surgery but not life-threatening. "Harrison and his faction want operatives who follow orders without question. You represent everything they're afraid of." "What am I supposed to do about it?" "You fight back," Wells replied with the fierce loyalty that had made their friendship so valuable. "But you do it smart. Document everything, build allies, and prove that your way works better than theirs. Eventually, even the hardliners will have to acknowledge results." Maya wasn't sure she had the patience for institutional politics. The incident with Wells had shaken her faith in Section 9's mission and her place within it. She joined the program hoping to find purpose and direction, but instead she discovered that even among people with extraordinary abilities, human nature remained depressingly ordinary. That night, she stood alone in her quarters, staring out at the Alaskan wilderness and wondering if Caden would approve of what his sister had become. She was more skilled than she'd ever imagined possible, surrounded by resources beyond most military units' dreams, and trusted with missions that could save hundreds of lives. But she was also isolated within her own organization, targeted by colleagues who saw her moral flexibility as weakness rather than strength, and increasingly uncertain about the true purpose of Section 9's activities. The choice she'd been avoiding since arriving at the Forge was becoming impossible to ignore. Conform to expectations and lose herself in the process, or maintain her integrity and risk becoming a casualty of institutional conflict. As she watched the aurora borealis dance across the northern sky, Maya realized that her greatest test wasn't waiting in some foreign country or dangerous mission. It was right here, within the walls of the facility that was supposed to be her sanctuary. The war for her soul was just beginning. 6 months after Wells's injury, Maya was summoned to what Colonel Idris described as an opportunity for redemption. The briefing took place in the same sterile conference room where her career nearly ended, but this time the atmosphere felt different, less adversarial, more desperate. Operation Phoenix Directive, Idris began, pulling up satellite imagery on the main screen. Viktor Petrov, former Spetsnaz commander turned warlord, has been feeding intelligence to our counterterrorism efforts for exchange for protection. Recent communications suggest he's ready to defect completely, but his location has been compromised. The images showed a compound in the mountains of Georgia, surrounded by hostile territory and accessible only through narrow valleys that could easily become kill zones.
Petrov has information about sleeper cells operating in major European cities, Grant added. If we lose him, we lose our best chance of preventing coordinated attacks across the continent. Maya noted the mission parameters with professional detachment. 12-hour extraction window, hostile forces converging on the compound, minimal air support available due to political sensitivities. It was exactly the kind of operation that Section 9 specialized in. High stakes, impossible odds, and no room for conventional military solutions. "I want to lead this mission," Maya said, surprising everyone in the room, including herself. Major Harrison leaned forward with obvious skepticism. "You think you're ready for independent command?" "I think I'm tired of wondering whether my own organization trusts me," Maya replied evenly. "Give me a team, give me the resources, and let me prove that my methods work." Idris exchanged glances with Grant before nodding slowly. "You'll have operational command. Choose your team carefully. This isn't a training exercise." Maya selected Wells despite her recent injuries, knowing that her technical expertise would be crucial for the mission's success. She also chose 2 other operatives she trusted, Martinez for logistics coordination and Chen for communications. It was a small team, but one bound by mutual respect rather than institutional hierarchy. The insertion went smoothly, but intelligence proved faulty from the moment they landed. Petrov wasn't at the designated compound. He'd been moved to a secondary location 40 kilometers away. Hostile forces were already in the area, having received intelligence about the extraction attempt. Worst of all, their extraction helicopter had been grounded by mechanical problems, leaving them stranded in enemy territory. "Control, this is Phoenix Leader," Maya radioed back to the forge. "Primary objective location is compromised. Requesting permission to adapt mission parameters." "Negative, Phoenix Leader," came Harrison's voice through the encrypted channel. "RTB immediately. Mission is scrubbed." Maya looked at her team, seeing the same frustration in their faces that she felt. Petrov's intelligence could save hundreds of lives, but bureaucratic caution was about to let him die in the mountains of Georgia. "Phoenix team, we're going off book," Maya announced. "Wells, can you hack the local communication networks and find Petrov's actual location?" "Give me 10 minutes," Wells replied, already connecting her portable equipment to a commandeered cell tower. What followed was 12 hours of improvised tactics, split-second decisions, and the kind of teamwork that only developed under extreme pressure. They found Petrov wounded and surrounded, fought their way through hostile forces that outnumbered them 10 to 1, and extracted their asset using a combination of Maya's precision shooting and Wells's electronic warfare capabilities. But the cost was higher than Maya had anticipated. During the final engagement, she was forced to kill 3 enemy combatants at close range, the first time she had taken lives since Marrakesh. Unlike the clinical precision of long-range shooting, these deaths were personal, immediate, and impossible to rationalize as anything other than what they were. When the dust settled and Petrov was safely aboard their improvised extraction vehicle, Maya found herself shaking with reaction. The mission was a success by any tactical measure, but something fundamental had changed inside her. "You did what you had to do," Grant's voice crackled through her earpiece as they crossed into friendly territory. "Petrov's intelligence has already prevented 2 attacks." Maya stared out at the Georgian countryside, trying to reconcile her actions with her carefully maintained moral boundaries. "How many more times?" she asked quietly. "What? How many more times do I have to kill people before I stop being someone my brother would recognize?" The silence that followed lasted until they reached the extraction point. 3 months later, Maya stood at the familiar firing line at Fort Richardson watching a new group of recruits prepare for their marksmanship assessment. Colonel Idris had asked her to guest instruct, describing it as an opportunity to share her expertise with the next generation. Drill Instructor Blevins approached her with something that looked almost like respect. In his hands, he carried the same sabotaged rifle that changed Maya's life 2 years ago. "Figured you might want to see this old friend," Blevins said, offering her the weapon. "Still broken, still useless, unless you're behind it." Maya took the rifle, feeling its familiar weight and balance. The scope was still misaligned, the barrel still warped, the trigger still unpredictable. But now she understood something she hadn't grasped during her first encounter with the weapon. "Attention, recruits," she called out, her voice carrying across the range. The young soldiers turned toward her with expressions of curiosity mixed with awe. They'd all heard stories about the woman who'd shot perfectly with a broken rifle. "This weapon is defective," Maya announced, holding the rifle up for everyone to see. "Damaged scope, warped barrel, mechanical problems that make accurate shooting nearly impossible. 2 years ago, your drill instructor gave it to me as a test and a lesson in humility."
She moved to the firing line, taking the same position she'd occupied during her first day at the facility. The target stood 200 yards away, pristine and unmarked. "I want you to understand something about precision," Maya continued, raising the rifle to her shoulder. "It's not about the equipment. It's not about natural talent or perfect conditions. Precision is about making choices under pressure and accepting responsibility for those choices." The range fell silent except for the wind cutting across the Alaskan tundra. Every shot you take in your career, whether in training, combat, or the moments in between, is a choice. You choose your target, you choose your timing, and you choose to pull the trigger. The rifle doesn't make that choice. Your training doesn't make that choice. You do. Maya's breathing settled into the familiar rhythm of controlled fire. The broken rifle became an extension of her will, its defects compensated by years of experience and understanding. "But here's what they don't teach you in marksmanship classes," she said, her finger finding the trigger. "The most important choice isn't whether you can make the shot. It's whether the target deserves to be hit." The rifle cracked once, sending a single bullet downrange. 200 yards away, it punched through the exact center of the bullseye. Maya worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, then set the rifle down and stepped back from the firing line. "That's the lesson," she announced to the stunned recruits. "Perfect shots are easy once you know how to make them. Perfect choices are what separates soldiers from killers, protectors from predators, and heroes from monsters." She looked at each young face in turn, seeing her own past reflected in their expressions. The question you need to ask yourselves isn't whether you can hit the target, it's whether the target deserves to be hit. With that, Maya walked away from the firing line, leaving the recruits to contemplate her words and the single perfect hole in their target. Blevins caught up with her as she reached the parking area. "That was quite a speech," he said. It was the truth, something I wish someone had told me when I was their age. What happens now? Back to the forge for another impossible mission? Maya looked back at the facility where her military career had begun,
then up at the Alaskan sky, where her brother's spirit seemed to dance among the clouds. Now I teach them how to choose their shots. All of them. 1 year later, Maya knelt beside Caden's grave in Oakland, the flowers in her hands bright against the gray marble headstone. It was the first time she'd visited since joining Section 9, the first time she'd felt ready to face her brother's memory without the crushing weight of guilt. "I figured it out," she said softly, arranging the flowers with careful precision. "What I'm supposed to do with what happened to us. It took longer than it should have, but I finally understand." The cemetery was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic and the whisper of wind through old oak trees. Maya sat back on her heels, studying the dates carved in stone that marked the beginning and end of her brother's too short life. "You always said that teaching was the most important job in the world, that helping people understand themselves was the only way to make real change. I didn't believe you then. I thought action was more important than understanding. But you were right, as usual." 6 months earlier, Colonel Idris had offered Maya a position as lead instructor for Section 9's new ethical integration program. Instead of training operatives to be more effective killers, the program focused on developing judgment, moral reasoning, and the kind of tactical flexibility that prioritized mission success over body counts. It wasn't traditional military training. Maya's curriculum included philosophy courses, psychological counseling, and extensive role-playing scenarios designed to test ethical boundaries under extreme pressure. The program attracted criticism from traditionalists like Major Harrison, but the results spoke for themselves. Graduates showed lower rates of PTSD, fewer civilian casualties, and mission success rates that exceeded conventional special operations units. "I'm not a weapon anymore," Maya told her brother's grave. "I mean, I could be if I had to. The skills don't just disappear, but that's not who I choose to be. I'm a teacher now, like you wanted to be." The position came with autonomy that Maya never experienced in military service. She could design her own training programs, select her own instructors, and most importantly, choose which recruits to accept into the program. Her first criterion wasn't marksmanship scores or physical fitness. It was moral courage under pressure. "The new recruits remind me of us when we were young, broken in different ways, but still believing they can make the world better. I teach them that being broken isn't the same as being weak, and that sometimes the people who've been hurt the most are the ones who understand protection the best." A young woman approached her position at the cemetery's edge, moving with the controlled confidence that Maya recognized in all her graduates. Lieutenant Sarah Kim had been Maya's first success story, a former trauma surgeon who joined Section 9 after losing too many patients to preventable violence. "Ma'am," Kim said quietly, "the transport is ready when you are." Maya stood, brushing dirt from her knees and taking one last look at Caden's headstone. "Thank you, Lieutenant. And Sarah, how many times do I have to tell you to call me Maya when we're off duty?" Kim smiled. "At least a few more times, I think. Old habits." They walked together toward the parking area, where a civilian sedan waited to take them to the airport. Maya's next assignment was a lecture series at the Naval War College, where she would teach senior officers about the integration of ethical reasoning into tactical decision-making. It wasn't the career path she'd imagined when she first picked up that broken rifle, but it felt right in ways that pure technical proficiency never had. "Ma'am, Maya," Kim corrected herself with a slight smile. "The new recruit files came in this morning. There's one that I think you'll want to review personally." Maya settled into the passenger seat and opened the file Kim handed her. The photograph showed a young man with haunted eyes and steady hands, a former EMT whose psychological profile included references to extraordinary situational awareness and instinctive tactical thinking. She recognized the look immediately, the same combination of trauma and potential that had defined her own journey. "Schedule him for a personal interview," Maya said, closing the file. "I want to meet him before he gets processed through regular channels." As their car pulled away from the cemetery, Maya looked back one final time at Caden's grave. She could almost imagine her brother's approving smile, could almost hear his voice reminding her that the best teachers were those who'd learned their lessons through experience rather than theory. The broken rifle was still locked in a display case in her office at the forge, a reminder that perfection wasn't about flawless equipment or ideal conditions. It was about making the right choices when everything else was falling apart. Maya had finally learned how to choose her shots. Now she would teach others to do the same. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.